Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, we're recording. So there we are. Well, welcome to this roundtable question session, in which we're asking the question why multimodal should have a place in supply chains. And I'm joined by John Clements from the sponsors of this event, Verdion. Morning, John. I wonder if we should just start by defining our terms. Actually, do you want to look? And this, just so you know, this is very much a conversation. People just jump in, and I'm hoping to do as little as possible. But John, I'm wondering if you could just explain what multimodal is first of all, and then we'll take the conversation from there.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Well, I think multimodal is essentially where different forms of transport comes together in one place. So you've obviously got road, and then you've got other modes of transport such as rail, air, seaports, perhaps even inland ports in some locations, or inland waterways. So essentially, that is my understanding of multimodal, various different forms of transport coming together in one place, switching goods between the two modes. And that's essentially what it is.
So presumably, I mean, it's quite a sort of specialist site in that sense. You know, if you're going to have trains, you have to be near a railway line and a station and a goods yard. And if you're going to have boats or whatever, you need to be near the sea. So I guess there's quite a sort of limited number of truly multimodal sites.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's all about the infrastructure that you know connect into. So most of the course of logistics parks around the UK are road based. And there's only a few that are connected to other forms of modal transports. Of course, I'm going to talk a lot about iPort, which is our major scheme in the north of England, where we have a dedicated rail terminal. So the site was chosen because it was next to a motorway junction and also next to a rail line, which wasn't used very heavily, and therefore you could easily divert goods from that rail line onto our rail terminal. So therefore we have a now multimodal facility. We're also close to Doncaster Sheffield International Airport, but I wouldn't say that was necessarily on the same site, but it's also useful to be close to air. And yeah, the benefits are that you've got a different type of supply chain. You can bring in a lot of goods in one go on a train. Lots of environmental benefits, of course. That's one of the reasons I think why it's seeing a bit of a resurgence. So historically, rail was really used for heavy goods such as coal. Coal has dropped off a cliff face over the last few years, and that's now been replaced by fast-moving consumer goods. It's a very good way of getting a large amount of goods from a seaport such as Felixstowe, Dover, or other parts of the country, Teesport, Hull, Immingham, all on the east coast, bringing them in on a train and then taking them off, storing them on the site, and then being able to shift them onto different forms of transport such as lorries. And for every ton of goods transported by rail, that will save about 70% of CO2. Rail uses 15 times less emissions of nitrous oxide. One train can take off 76 lorries off the road. And in fact, at iPort over last year, we have taken 50,000 HGV journeys off the road. So it's a real environmental benefit, takes traffic off the road, frees up the motorways, and saves a lot of CO2 and other harmful emissions. So there's a lot of benefits to using rail.
Tell me a little bit more about your place. What's the name of it again?
So that's iPort, short for Inland Port. You've got the rail as the port. That's a 6 million square foot logistics park just south of Doncaster, north South Yorkshire.
Can I ask about the railway bit of it? Because did you actually? I mean, if you're going to bring a railway goods truck into your site, as it were, presumably you're having to build railway lines, and you're sort of joining those onto the sort of British Rail or the Network Rail network.
Yes, and that's, I can assure you, not an easy feat to deal with
Yeah.
a large institution like Network Rail. Things move slowly in a certain way. So it took many years of careful planning and quite a lot of expense. But yes, we've got a junction onto the rail, on and off the rail line, and then we have several spurs of rail line sidings coming onto two I-ports adjacent to the main train line. And then next to that, you have a hard standing platform for maneuvering containers and also storing containers. So that's all within our own site and our own control. We have about 30 acres of land dedicated to the rail terminal, and we also have the ability to expand further. In fact, since we opened the terminal in 2018, Princess Royal opened the terminal. We've seen immense growth. We're almost at capacity already. We've got about 6 to 8 trains a day coming in and out of the rail terminal, storing up to 1,500 containers already. So yeah, this clearly the demand was there for the use of rail and the storage of containers.
Now I can see other people on this call. I'm not quite sure how we make sure that they can take part in the conversation, but I'm keen that they do. I can see Sally, I can see Laura, and I think Rob and Matt. So if any of you would like to sort of put your tuppence worth in, or ask John a question or anything else, please do join us, unmute and go for it. But I'd like to just explore, because I think it's really interesting, actually, John, the sort of use of rail. I'm old enough to sort of remember the sort of beaching cuts of the 60s, and we were sort of giving up on a lot of this. So obviously that was about passengers originally, but the idea that we might be sort of recreating some of these rail lines and using them as part of multimodal centres is really interesting. What's the potential for it, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there was a tragedy, the beaching cuts, and I think rail is having a renaissance now, particularly with the environmental and green agenda becoming more prominent. Love it or hate it, HS2 is going to free up quite a lot of capacity on the existing rail lines, which will hopefully allow a lot more goods to be transported by rail on the existing freight lines. So I think that's really interesting. And I think we can see it at I-Port, and I think a lot of other places in the UK. There's a lot of potential schemes, big parks developing, which are going to have dedicated rail freight terminals. Obviously, East Midlands is another new one. And I think it's going to open up a lot of capacity, and hopefully a lot more goods will be moved by rail, and there'll be ways of using the system more efficiently in the future, hopefully.
How interesting. What would your advice be to someone who's thinking, well, actually that would work for our, we're thinking of something, it'd be quite good to tie it in with rail. You suggested it was quite a tricky conversation, it took a few years, but presumably that path, you've trodden it already. What's your advice to people who'd like to go down it as well?
Well, what's really interesting is that we've got some really great tenants at I-Port, and when they first came to I-Port, there wasn't really necessarily motivation to use rail, but almost all of them now are either using rail or in quite advanced discussions with us about using the rail terminal, and that includes Amazon, that includes Lidl, that includes Seaver. Interestingly, Seaver's main client at I-Port is Nike. Nike very, very keen to use rail more, improve their green footprint. For maritime transport, we've got Woodland. In fact, Woodland came to I-Port with a specific wish to use and actively use the rail terminal. Kingsbury Press, and also Fellows, another major international brand. So almost all the tenants at I-Port are either using rail now or hopefully will be using it in the future. So I think for any developer out there looking to thinking about utilizing rail, yes, it is complicated, yes, it's expensive, but if you build it, we think the demand of the tenants and the use will come. And it's not just, of course, tenants on the estate itself, it's also businesses in the wider region that can come and freely access the port as well. So it's a regional benefit.
Yeah, no, I can see it. And in terms of the movements themselves, so you've got freight which you need to get off quickly, and then presumably you're having to sort of negotiate a slot. I'm trying to sort of work out. Presumably, there could be a risk, I suppose, that they've got their own, passenger and freight requirements already, and you're going to bang, can we get our train, please? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, of course, there is a limited amount of slots. There's obviously always lobbying going on to increase the amount of slots, and we've managed to get enough for all our clients. But of course, the rail industry has a way of regulating itself. There are various bodies that regulate that. We've got a dedicated team at iPort Rail, very experienced rail people managers who run the terminal, and they liaise with Network Rail and all the other bodies they need to liaise with to make sure we get the slots for our customers. And of course, the train users themselves, the train operators, of course, such as GB Rail Freight, who are the main user of the estate, are the key part of that, because they're the ones that need to get their trains from the different locations into the UK into iPort. So yes, that all has to be planned well. The amount of slots is one of the kind of constraints, but I think that is opening up. As I said, the heavy fossil fuel use is dropped off, so that's creating more pathways and more slots for the rail, the rail companies to use for other clients.
That's really interesting. I am keen to bring other people in, but I'm seeing faces, just photographs, and not hearing anything. So if anyone wants to say anything, do join us. Come on.
There's a few familiar faces that I've worked with in the past. It's great to see Sally on the call. Also Rob, and of course Laura. Feel free to hit us with any questions or come up with any comments.
They are quite quiet at the moment, but let's carry on our conversation, John, because I'm genuinely interested in how, in a way, we're going sort of back to the roots of the Industrial Revolution in some senses here. So we're rediscovering the importance of the rail network for moving stuff around, because it's relatively environmentally friendly compared with roads. And I'm going to guess, actually, that the sort of political will, given the sustainability element of this, there's probably going to be, it's going to become more positive rather than anything else. There's going to be more of a push towards this.
Yeah, I think so, and I hope so. It's so logical, really, because you want to get traffic off the road. You want to decrease congestion. You want to decrease pollution. So therefore, it's completely logical that rail should be promoted. And I think with HS2 coming, that's going to make that's such a heavy political investment. Surely they want to see other benefits from releasing capacity off the current transport network. So I hope so, Mark.
Yeah, no, well, Rob, you've joined us in vision, which is lovely.
It's taken a challenge to get there. I think there's been a technical link on it, but I just thought
you were keen and the technology wasn't, is what you're telling me.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Maybe it's the link from Yorkshire that's the problem. I was just interested in John's view on Freeports and whether how you see that really impacting.
Yeah, well, Rob, very interesting, and I was quite deeply involved in Freeports before Christmas, because we were part of the South Yorkshire bid, along with Harworth and some other regional manufacturers and sites. So we spent a lot of time putting together quite a well-prepared Freeport bid. Of course, we were up against tough competition in the region with Hull, and I think it turned out really to be a political thing and a geographical thing. So I think the benefits, if you're a landlord having a Freeport, are fantastic. You've got rates mitigation, rates free for 5 years. You've got capital allowance benefits. You've got employment benefits. You've got access to seed capital. So it makes a lot of sense for a developer and landowner and local businesses to be part of a Freeport. I think the bigger political question is, how beneficial will Freeports be for the economy and for GB generally? That I don't know. There's a lot of negative press about it, which might well be true. So we were disappointed not to win it. I think time will tell if they're successful in regeneration and improving the economics for regions. We'll have to see. I don't know what your view is, Rob.
I've been trying to work out from an occupier perspective. I don't know. I really sense that some of the occupiers, the businesses, really got their head around what it brings to them, and therefore, will there be a drive for demand to be located in these food ports? Would you have secured the deals at iPort had free ports been in existence and deliverable sites say on them? Would people have been drawn there, or would they have still come to you? I suppose would be
that's the question. If they had a choice of two sites that were similar in other respects, and one was a free port and one wasn't, I would imagine they would choose the free port site because they're getting quite a lot of tax and benefits from not paying stamp duty for 5 years, for example, not stamp duty rates for 5 years, and other employment and accelerated capital allowance. So economically, it's going to be, it'd be good, it'd be useful for them. So I think occupiers might benefit from it.
I can see Sally's joined us. Hello.
Hi. Hello there.
Were you able to hear, or were you?
I could hear, and I was trying to say hi, but it looks like they've switched my mic on now. So I just thought
all is well. All is well. So as I was saying, I'm keen for this to be more of just a conversation around everybody. So do you want to sort of? I think we've been talking quite a lot about iPort and railways and sort of development of free ports. Have you got some thoughts around that?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I was checking in today because I've always been a big fan of iPorts, and John knows this. Mike certainly does. Amazon, we were banging the drum in 2012 about coming to this site. So I was really I've always had a dear place in my heart really for iPort because it flew off the page, and at the time, we couldn't couple volumes to the real use, but I knew that if we built it, Amazon would eventually catch up and start using it. So I'm wondering, now that I'm no longer at Amazon and actually, working for a competitor of John's in the developer world, but I'm interested, John, have Amazon started to use it themselves? I'm imagining some of the stock comes to them via their vendors via rail, but are you able to say anything about actually if they are utilising it now?
Well, firstly, Sally, welcome to the dark side as a developer. I'm glad you've joined the fold, and I'm sure your experience on the tenant side will be really, really valuable there. Well, I have to be a little bit careful what I say. I suppose what I can say is that Amazon now are in quite advanced discussions with our rail team about using the rail terminal, and I think particularly they have a new, what they call an IXD facility on the site, which is like a giant cross-dock facility, which is quite a new concept for Amazon. So they're bringing in containerized goods right at the top of the supply chain onto the iPort site that will then be broken down into the smaller components, and then to the regional distribution centers, and then I guess to the local last mile distribution centers. So Mark, Amazon have a huge sophisticated supply chain, which Sally obviously knows more about than I do, but I think it makes so much sense because the containers, you're bringing a whole load of containers on one train from a port as far away as Felixstowe onto a site right next to where the facility is. It's going to make a huge amount of sense, and I think it's a matter of months before Amazon start using the rail terminal in their own dedicated capacity. They'll already be using it through their supply chain and their other providers, but I do believe they will come, and I think it's going to be soon now, but I probably can't disclose too much more than that from sort of commercial discussions, but it seems like a no-brainer, and I think it's going to be a game changer. We know Amazon, don't we, Sally? They're already either using or seriously considering having their own dedicated air freight. So this is just another part of their use of multimodal.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and I hadn't realised they were looking at sort of direct injection through the 8 building there, isn't it? But that's fascinating, John. Well, I wish you all the best with that. And I always took I had to make the case to the business at the time that we should bake in more multimodality. And I think probably the general response I got back at the time was, "Is it going to cost us any more?" So we were very keen to show that it wasn't going to cost anymore, and bake in that capability for the future. And here we are now with Amazon on the as you say, on the tipping point of leveraging prime air and actually potentially introducing rail in the network. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Definitely, and I think it seems that Amazon have really upped their game on the environmental ESG benefits. Now we know that they're looking at putting solar on many of their buildings. We know they're looking or have bought huge amounts of electric vehicles, and rail is just obvious a way for them to improve the green credentials of their supply chain, and I suspect will be cost benefit to them as well.
John,
can I just ask to Amazon bring in, so on a train you have the big containers, and then they have to break them down, as you were saying. Do they have a big shed on your site then, specifically for that job? I mean, how does it work?
Yeah, well, Amazon are our biggest clients. In fact, when Sally worked there, we did our first deal with Amazon. So they occupy almost 2 million square feet of logistics space across 3 buildings that I bought, which is obviously, one of the buildings is 1.1 million square feet, it's half a kilometre long. You can fit 15 football pitches inside it. So just getting the scale of these facilities, Mark, is they're just vast. Each one is worth £100 million plus easily. So they have a huge footprint at iPort, and each of these buildings has a different use. The latest building is this facility, which is what we call a cross dock, where goods come in one end and then are taken out another end. They're more fast moving. They're not necessarily stored for a long period of time. And this particular concept is to bring in the container goods, which generally arrive at ports. And then this container will come up to the warehouse, will be emptied, reparceled, broken down to smaller packages, and then sent to other regional distribution facilities across the country. And that's how they're going to process these goods, certainly at iPort.
Oh, that's fascinating.
I was going to ask one question, John. I suppose I haven't had much exposure to rail freight in the intermodal concept, but just in terms of the growth capacity within the UK, does our rail network have the capacity for it to grow, or is that how big an issue is that going to be?
I think it's always the issue with rail freight is the competition with passengers. So the East Coast Main Line is the line that we at iPort connect into via the rail, the rail interconnectivity at Doncaster. So it's the East Coast Main Line, which is obviously a major thoroughfare north-south, and it's the same with the West Coast Main Line. So there is only a limited amount of slots and capacity that could go onto that rail line. And that's what I was saying earlier about HS2 and perhaps other rail improvements, big infrastructure projects, should, in theory, help free up capacity on the existing rail lines, the East Coast Main Line, West Coast Main Line, and others. And hopefully that will then allow more rail freight to be transported on the existing networks. So yeah, capacity is an issue. We know they've had capacity coming in and out of Felixstowe because there's so much demand. And I know Network Rail have been making improvements to increase capacity. But I think investment in infrastructure, that needs to happen, continue to happen.
What you were saying about you building the railway line, I mean, this really does go back to the sort of 19th century, doesn't it? The idea that sort of private people are building their own railway lines and then they attach onto the network. And I wonder whether that model might increase. That was, if you're Amazon and you've got that kind of money, you're thinking, well, actually, rather than wait for the government or the Department for Transport to say, right, we're going to build this link, you just do it yourself. And obviously, you have to get into the network eventually, but it might be interesting.
Yes, it would. I mean, the challenge is to get. It could easily take 5 years, Mark, of negotiation and planning to get a rail connection onto a Network Rail line, existing line. So it's something that requires a lot of planning, a lot of investment. And I think that's more likely to come from developers who are looking at a wider estate. And there are some benefits of the current planning regime, and there are quite a few plans, particularly in the Midlands, for sites which can have a strategic rail freight terminal. And that also helps unlock the planning permission. So if you invest in a rail terminal, it will allow you to have a national infrastructure designation. to unlock the ability to get planning permission on site, which I think is going to create quite a few more of rail facilities on inland sites across Britain. But again, it takes time, takes a lot of investment. But there's quite a few projects we've certainly looked at over the years, and particularly in the Midlands, where rail is going to be at the heart of the new logistics state.
Yeah, and politically, the levelling up agenda. I'd imagine that there will be people when they're looking at trying to improve the passenger rail infrastructure. Actually, we want to make sure that the sector is in those conversations and say, well, yeah, make sure we've got the infrastructure for that as well. And presumably, the metro mayors and city mayors and so on are going to be critical in ensuring that that's part of the conversation.
I certainly hope so. It's logical. If you're investing in a lot of infrastructure, you should also be using it for freight if it's all possible. And the investments in electrification as well. Electric train is going to be a lot better environmentally than a diesel one. So all of that's got to come along. So I hope we continue to do better on rail in this country than we have in the last sort of 50 years or so. And there is an opportunity now.
Yeah, volumes are growing. I've got the benefit of looking after another rail freight terminal at Durft, which has got 3 terminals in the Midlands, and there's construction, aggregates are declining. Coal, as John mentioned, is declined, but the volumes for other products are increasing, and it's heartening to hear, John, you saying about the Nike's focus, Woodland's focus, etc., to bring products through. Network Rail is certainly more alive to freight and the possibilities of generating income from freight post-COVID than in recent years, because the slots have been not freed up, but passenger volumes have declined, and there's an opportunity now for them to fill capacity with freight trains. So certainly welcome the Shapps Williams report, which came out last week, which places emphasis on freight in a much bigger way than we've seen national planning policy, for instance, place emphasis on logistics over housing. So there is a moment of opportunity, I think, to for the Network Rail to assist developers such as Verdion. And ourselves to get in there and get more trains running, but it's good to see so many occupiers starting to realise that this can fit very, very well with their ESG agendas.
Yeah, it's very good. Fortuitous that the timing's come at the same time, that there's more capacity at the same time as tenants are really pushing to use, businesses are really pushing to use rail more.
Yeah, there's a question. I don't know whether you've seen it. Because Laura's but we can't hear from her or see her moving. But she has asked a question, wondering whether there's an environmental element to the ESG moving up corporate agendas. Well, we sort of touched on that a little bit. But Sally, I'd just like to get your perspective on to what extent the sort of green credentials of rail, I don't know, maybe waterways and other forms of sort of transport infrastructure are going to be in the minds of investors and in the minds of the big manufacturers.
So was that directed at me? Yeah. Apologies. It's a bit the line's a bit shaky.
There's something going on. There's a sort of noise from somewhere. I don't know what it is. Not me.
Yeah, there's been a bit of feedback there. But I mean, the benefits of rail are astonishing. We've had a leg up during the pandemic in terms of so much PPE was moved by rail, and I'm sure John saw it at iPort across this as well. It's latest sort of stats show that last year rail freight grew 2% on the year before, and that's despite the port congestion and the lockdown affecting operations. And as John mentioned, it takes thousands of lorry journeys off the road.
Carry on. I don't know what that is. Strange someone somewhere is making a dreadful racket, but it's none of us.
So there are huge benefits. The trains now can be 750 meters long. That takes so many HGVs off the road. That equates to the use of rail, we think, prevents about 600 road casualties a year alone. So purely from a safety perspective, it's a massive figure. 95% of freight is diesel. But as John mentioned there, that, if we move to electrification and network rail, invest in places like Ely, which John will be really, keen to see happen. The junction improvements need to happen there, so Felixstowe capacity can be released. The benefits will come and come and come. So, and then you've got a few of the freight operators, companies are trialling HVO, which is hydrotreated vegetable oil. So you've got electrification and you've got other methods to move away from the hydrocarbons. So, huge benefits. Tesco's a massive user of rail. They're in the process at the moment of investing 5 million to free up some more routes up to Middlesbrough. So we've got, you just get the sense that we're in this tipping point of actually occupiers becoming more and more alive to this, seeing that they can reduce HGV miles, which is, the HGV miles reduction is something like, I think we worked out, would save in the UK. Last year, it equated to 2,500 trips to the moon and back by HGVs. It was just...
Oh, I like that metric. That's great. Yeah. Do we all understand that?
So yeah, I've had a baptism of fire in the last five months, learning all about it. But really big fan.
Yeah, you were mentioning, or we were mentioning that the decline in passenger transport on the railways in the last year. But I wonder to what extent that is a COVID effect, and actually what we might see is as people kind of go, oh yeah, we can get around the place, and leaping back on trains once they feel safe and the vaccines, rollout is finished, and actually you might find your freight slots squeezed again.
Yeah, I think it will build up over time. And at the moment, Network Rail are talking about the ability to introduce more freight. And as John says, HS2 will give capacity back, certainly on the West Coast Main Line there when that's finished for freight. At the minute, the timetables are such that Network Rail tell us that even though the trains aren't running at the moment, that those slots are preserved. And it's fair to say that the demand isn't is on the up, but it's not an immediate issue. The cool thing is that Network Rail are in the conversation. They really want to get behind freight and leveraging their estate to make sure that more users can switch. So I think it's whether or not they're saying that and actually the Shaps William report talks about passenger numbers not returning immediately. They're certainly expecting that it's not going to be an immediate back to the way it was, for sure.
Yeah, interesting. One thing that did strike me about these multimodal hubs is that they must be absolutely massive consumers of energy. And I mean, John, in terms of how do you very strange, another conversation, a party going on somewhere. It must be, and how do you, just in terms of literally getting the amount of energy you need into presumably what was an area that didn't have that to start with, that must be a massive job.
It is. Availability of power is one of the key issues in any industrial estate or any new developments, and getting power in the UK can be quite difficult, expensive. Availability of it is not always there. We had to take power from 2 different sources at iPort. In the end, we reserved a massive amount of 52 MVA, which is more than enough to power quite a lot of quite big factories. Warehouses typically don't use a lot of power, and most these days, certainly ours are built to pretty high energy efficiency standards. Most of ours are about get EPC ratings of A15, which is very, very energy efficient. And it's only really when it's used for something where there's a lot of equipment, manufacturing. Amazon use a fair bit because they have got a lot of equipment, HVAC, robotics. If you have a warehouse which is temperature controlled, of course, they'll use a lot more power. So having power is obviously essential. most warehouses don't use too much, but some need a lot. We have now agreed with the local energy providers to be able to put a lot of power back into the grid from renewable sources. So we're already now exploring putting PV on the roofs of many of our buildings. I know Amazon want to do it as well on their buildings. So actually, it's a lot of the issues of, I think solar is a great idea, but also actually getting the power back into the grid can be a stumbling point. So you've got all these hurdles to overcome. But yeah, we've sorted it, but every site in the UK will have its challenges getting power.
We were talking about this, weren't we? I mean, yesterday and again today, this idea of actually carpeting the roofs of warehouses with solar panels, and then using that to charge up electric vehicles and selling some of it back to the grid. And it all sounds fantastic, but I know that from conversations we were having yesterday that many warehouses don't cover the whole of their roof. So they find the process of selling back to the grid quite tricky. I mean, it sounds as though you're doing pretty well at iPort.
There's a lot of annoying hurdles. Some of them are the legal structures of leases in the UK. It's a fully repair insuring lease, and I'm constantly having a battle trying to get approval to put more solar on roofs, and particularly with the tenants and their lawyers. So it's I don't think we're far away. I mean, what you really want is a tenant to agree to take the power from the roof, and for the landlord to fund the installation of that equipment, on the basis that even if that tenant leaves, another tenant will come along and will then be able to use that power. Any excess power can either be stored in batteries or can be sold back into the grid. And the key there is just making sure you have an agreement to who's responsible for maintaining the system and the roof itself. And these are all the little hurdles that the property folk amongst us are dealing with. And I'm sure Sally and Rob probably have come across it themselves. So we're working hard on it. I think a lot of the tenants are now coming around to it. I know Woodland, one of our newest tenants, are definitely going to put solar on. In other countries, we're working in Germany, we're putting solar on a lot of our buildings. So it is coming slowly, and I think it will continue to increase. Yeah,
Rob, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I work for a developer building kind of mid-size units. We have a lot of renewable technology going into our buildings, but the big issue we have is reliance. The reliance businesses put place on that in terms of their continuation of power, and a lot will come down to, certainly for the bigger power requirements, the ability to put battery technology in there so that they can store that power for when they need it. But ultimately, any green energy is an add-on to what they can get off the grid. So I think as technology will develop, the importance of that green power will increase.
I wonder if we've talked a lot about railways, and obviously iPort, that's a key part of that. But if we're going to discuss multimodal, perhaps we should talk about a few other modes. Waterways. I don't know. Does anyone think that we're going to start using those more effectively? Obviously, very green, and maybe not quite as quick as rail or road, but I don't know. I mean,
I was interested. I was thinking about that because I was involved in a development in Goole, an intermodal terminal, which was taking freight. That was the theory behind it was taking freight from the larger ships that couldn't dock in UK, that would go to dock in Rotterdam, and there were seafaring boats that could come over the North Sea, up the Humber, and potentially then down the Trent or the Aire and Calder down to Sturton, so very close to Leeds. And in theory, it was very good. And you look at the carbon footprints, I don't have the figures to hand, but it was significantly better than road and better than rail as well. But there were so many hurdles for that, not least what was then British Waterways, now the Canals and Rivers Trust, getting their mind round to freight going back onto their waterways as opposed to their drive, which was more leisure use.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's ever come, but when you looked at the figures, it was quite, and there were certain products that it suited well, the bulk products, the stone and the things that were coming in barges. And I still think they're talking about that at Gould, but whether it'll ever come off, I don't know. John, I don't know if you've kind of come across the Gould.
No, I'm trying to think where in the UK you've got size of canals or navigable rivers which could actually accommodate much sizable freight. And
it needs to be big enough for a container, doesn't it? And I guess that the original barges were really for coal and other supplies like that, so they probably just not quite fit for purpose. Maybe that's
there's the Thames, there's portage on the Thames, and that's really typically being used for waste out London and construction materials in. The problem with adapting that, and I know there's lots of work going on around portage for e-commerce, for instance. But the problem is all the landing spots are for waste or for construction. So there's quite, these people that have stayed in the industry and have leveraged it over the years have got the benefit of owning the real estate now in central London. So it's going to be interesting to see whether that can be shifted or adapted to take more modern forms of cargo, I suppose.
The other issue that on the Gould one that came across was the waterways were big enough so you could get the freight up the Aire and Calder Canal to Sturton, but had all the bridges, even the railway bridges that went over the canal, the road bridges, so the infrastructure changes that were required were quite substantial. Albeit, I remember one of the studies, the heavier the weight, the lower in the water the barge sat, so that it could just nip under some of the bridges. But it was that level of discussion.
The empty ones going back again. That's your problem.
Compare this country with somewhere like Germany or the Netherlands, which has got obviously massive canals and some major rivers like the Elbe or Danube or Rhine, which are actually navigable. They're obviously, it happens and it works, and you go into a city like Dusseldorf and you'll see these huge barges going up and down the river. But I think looking at the geography of the UK, probably the investment in maintaining or creating inland waterways is probably, I can't imagine it ever being a big component of transport in the UK, freight transport.
Well, I wonder. I mean, we kind of thought railways were finished, don't we? And now they're coming back. So who knows? Bicycles. People are riding bicycles now. One last thought before we finish. Got a couple of minutes. It's just on air. Really, you were mentioning, John, that you're close to the airport, but I was thinking more about sort of new drone technologies, that kind of thing. And, is that in people's thoughts? Are they beginning to think about using multi-modal as a sort of launch point for that kind of service, or is that still too far away?
I've not personally come across any requirements for drones. It's normally a topic of one of these conferences. And I'm sure it will be, and I'm sure it's being tested. And it could just happen overnight one of these years, but I personally don't have any experience or knowledge of that. I don't know, Sally, if you've come across.
Yeah, well, I did a little bit my last job, but my ears pricked up the other day that Royal Mail are doing it to Guernsey. I think I heard that, or the Scilly Isles or something.
Yeah, the Scilly. I think it was the Scilly, wasn't it? You're right. Yeah.
Just something. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because we definitely, you hear lots of examples, don't you, in remote places, in terms of medicine supplies in Africa and things like that. I'm behind the curve. A day after I left Amazon, I was behind the curve with what's going on in Amazon, and it's 3.5 years ago now. So coming up 4 actually. So yeah, I think if there's a gap in the market, they'll go for it, no doubt. But
just keep an eye on